The cold autumn wind rattled the shutters of the small, run-down boarding house in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico Territory, 1883. As Winifred Lawson huddled beneath a threadbare blanket, her eyes fixed on the door that would never again open to reveal her father's weathered face. The letter from the town's sheriff had arrived that morning, explaining in stiff, formal language that Thomas Lawson had been found dead in an abandoned mine shaft, the victim of claim jumpers who had taken not only his life but also the gold dust that might have secured his daughter's future. Winnie pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, the flickering light of a single candle casting long shadows across the barren room. At 21 years of age, she was now alone in a frontier town that had little use for unmarried women except in capacities she refused to consider. The landlady, Mrs. Peterson, had made it clear that, without next week's rent, Winnie would find herself on the street. Her father's meager possessions wouldn't fetch enough to keep a roof over her head for more than a few days. The wind howled louder, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered with its own mournful cry. Winnie closed her eyes, willing away the tears that threatened. She was the daughter of a prospector. She'd learned long ago that tears did nothing to fill an empty stomach or warm, cold bones. A soft, tapping sound broke through her thoughts. At first, she thought it was just another trick of the wind, but when it came again, more insistent this time, she realized it was coming from the window. Cautiously, she rose from the bed, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath her feet as she approached the small, grimy pane of glass. What she saw made her heart leap into her throat. A man's face peered in at her, his features shadowed by the brim of a wide cowboy hat. She should have screamed, should have run for the door, but something in his eyes, something gentle despite the harshness of his sun-weathered face, kept her rooted to the spot. He tapped again, then gestured for her to open the window. Against her better judgment, Winnie unlatched it, letting in a rush of cold night air. "Miss Lawson." His voice was deep with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent years in the saddle. "Name's Samuel Reed. I was a friend of your father's, heard what happened." His eyes, which she could now see were a startling blue, flickered to the darkening bruise on her cheek, a parting gift from Mrs. Peterson when Winnie had asked for a few days' grace on the rent. "Looks like you could use some help. Come inside." Winnie blinked in confusion. "I am inside." A brief smile crossed his face. "My place, not far from here. It ain't much, but it's warm, it's safe, and nobody there will raise a hand to you." He nodded toward her bruised cheek. "I promised your pa I'd look out for you if anything ever happened to him." "Never thought I'd have to make good on that promise, but here we are," Winnie hesitated. Her father had never mentioned a Samuel Reed, but then again, Thomas Lawson had known many men in his wanderings across the territory. And what choice did she really have? Stay here until Mrs. Peterson threw her out, or worse? "Let me get my things," she said finally. "I'll meet you at the front door." Samuel Reed shook his head. "Back door would be better. Mrs. Peterson's got a habit of charging exit fees when her boarders leave without notice. I'll be waiting by the cottonwood." As quickly as he had appeared, he vanished from the window, leaving Winnie staring at her reflection in the glass. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, pale, thin, with eyes too large for her face and a bruise blooming on one cheekbone. She touched the mark gingerly, then squared her shoulders. Her father had always said she had more grit than most men he knew. It was time to prove him right. Winnie didn't own much. A dress besides the one she wore, a few personal items, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the small leather-bound Bible that had been in her family for generations. Everything fit into a single carpet bag that had seen better days. She tucked her father's pocket watch, the only thing of value she possessed, into her skirt pocket and blew out the candle. The boarding house was quiet as she crept down the back stairs. Most of the other residents were either asleep or out at the saloons that did brisk business even on Sunday nights. She slipped through the back door and into the small yard, where a gnarled cottonwood tree stood sentinel against the night sky. Samuel Reed materialized from the shadows, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion that stamped impatiently in the dirt. "Ever ridden before?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Winnie nodded. "My father taught me when I was young." Without another word, Samuel took her carpetbag and secured it to the saddle, then offered her his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before placing her fingers in his. His hand was calloused but warm, and he hoisted her onto the horse with an effortless strength that spoke of years of hard physical labor. He swung up behind her, his chest a solid wall against her back, and with a soft click of his tongue, the horse moved forward into the night. They rode in silence through the sleeping town, past darkened storefronts and the still-lit windows of saloons where tinny piano music spilled into the street. Winnie kept her eyes fixed ahead, aware of the warmth of the man behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the strange sense of safety she felt despite the circumstances. Once they cleared the town limits, Samuel urged the horse into a trot, and Winnie found herself gripping the saddle horn to keep her balance. "Not much farther," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "My place is just beyond that ridge." True to his word, they soon crested a small hill, and Winnie saw a cabin nestled in a grove of pine trees. It was modest but well built, with a small corral to one side and what looked like a vegetable garden to the other. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm light spilled from the windows. "You left a lamp burning?" she asked, surprised. Most frontier folk were careful with lamp oil and candles, precious commodities in these parts. "Wasn't expecting to bring back company," Samuel replied as he guided the horse toward a small stable attached to the cabin. "But I've got a neighbor, widow woman named Sarah Thornton. Probably saw I was gone and lit the place up for when I got back. She does that sometimes." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Winnie down. Her legs felt stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Samuel's hands steadied her, strong and sure on her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could smell the scent of him leather and pine and something uniquely male. He cleared his throat and stepped back, taking the reins of his horse. "Why don't you go on inside and warm yourself by the fire? Door's not locked. I'll just seat a blaze here and join you in a minute." Winnie hesitated, suddenly aware of what she was doing going into the home of a man she had just met, a man who claimed to have known her father but of whom she had no recollection. But the alternative was to spend the night in the cold, or worse, return to Mrs. Peterson's, where only debt and possible degradation awaited her. The cabin door creaked as she pushed it open, and she was immediately enveloped in blessed warmth. The main room was simple but neat: a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, some shelves with books and provisions, and a stone fireplace where a fire burned merrily. 2 doors led off from the main room, presumably to bedrooms. She moved closer to the fire, holding out her hands to the flames, and tried to make sense of her situation. Her father was gone, leaving her alone in a harsh land where a woman without protection was vulnerable to all manner of predators, both animal and human. And now she had thrown her lot in with a stranger who might be her salvation or her doom. The door opened behind her, and Samuel Reed stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of horses. He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and hung it on a peg by the door. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "I realize this is an unusual situation, but I want you to know you're safe here. Your pa and I worked some claims together a few years back before he moved on to truth or consequences. He was a good man, honest in a place where that's rare." He gestured to one of the closed doors. "That room there is yours for as long as you need it. It ain't much, but it's clean." Winnie studied him in the firelight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, hard build of a man who lived by his muscle and wits. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he was in his early 30s. There was nothing in his appearance to suggest dishonesty, but she had learned that appearances could be deceiving. "Mr. Reed," she said, lifting her chin slightly, "I appreciate your kindness, but I find myself at a disadvantage. My father never mentioned you, and I have only your word that you were his friend. For all I know, you could be a claim jumper, a thief, or worse." He smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. "Fair enough. Your pa ever tell you about the time he nearly died in a cave-in at the Blue Ridge mine?" Winnie nodded slowly. "He said another miner pulled him out just before the whole shaft collapsed." Samuel rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his wrist almost to his elbow. "Got that pulling him free. Rock came down and caught me as we were running. He patched me up afterwards, said he owed me his life." He let his sleeve fall back into place. "I told him we were square, but he insisted that if I ever needed anything, I should come to him. Last month, I ran into some trouble with a man named Clayton Black, professional gambler with a reputation for cheating and a quick temper. I defended a young boy he was trying to fleece, and Black put the word out that he was looking for me. Your pa offered me a place to lie low until Black moved on to another town. I've been staying in a line shack on his claim for the past 3 weeks. He moved to the stove, lifting a kettle and pouring hot water into a waiting teapot. I was coming back to town today to tell him I'd be moving on when I heard what happened. Sheriff Jenkins said the claim jumpers took everything, including his gold dust, said you were staying at Peterson's place." His jaw tightened. "That woman's known for taking advantage of folks down on their luck, especially women. I couldn't just ride away knowing that." Winnie watched as he set 2 tin cups on the table and poured tea into each. The simple domesticity of the act, combined with the straightforward way he told his story, eased some of her suspicion. If he meant her harm, there were easier ways to accomplish it than this elaborate tale. "My father died with his boots on then," she said softly, accepting the cup he offered her. "He always said that's how he wanted to go." Samuel nodded, his eyes softening. "A lot of men say that, but your pa meant it. He loved the search more than the finding. Used to say that the day he struck it rich would be the saddest of his life because the adventure would be over." Despite herself, Winnie smiled. It sounded exactly like something Thomas Lawson would say. She sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. "So what happens now, Mr. Reed?" He leaned against the table, his own cup cradled in his large hands. "That's up to you, Miss Lawson. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to. I can sleep in the stable if it makes you more comfortable, or I can take you to Santa Fe where there's more opportunity for a young woman. I know some good people there who might help you find respectable work." The thought of going to a city where she knew no one, even with introductions, made Winnie's stomach clench with anxiety. "And if I stay here," Samuel shrugged, "then you stay. Truth is, I could use some help around the place. The garden needs tending, and I'm not much of a hand at it. I've been thinking about getting some chickens, too, but I'm gone too often to look after them properly." He set down his cup and looked her straight in the eye. "I won't lie to you, Miss Lawson. This is a hard life, especially for a woman. But if you're anything like your father, and I suspect you're no stranger to hard work." Winnie took another sip of her tea, considering. She had no illusions about her prospects. In a territory where men outnumbered women 3-to-1, an unattached female had few options: marriage, often to a man decades her senior, domestic service, which frequently led to unwanted advances, or work in the saloons, where a woman's virtue was the first casualty. Samuel Reed was offering her something different, a chance to maintain her independence while she figured out what to do next. And if he proved untrustworthy, well, she had survived this long in a harsh land. She would find a way to survive again. "I believe I will stay, Mr. Reed," she said finally. "At least until I can make other arrangements, and please call me Winnie, all my friends do." A genuine smile lit up his face, transforming his rugged features. "Then you must call me Sam. Only the law and men looking to shoot me call me Mr. Reed." Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, with the fire crackling and the tea warming her from within, Winnie felt the first stirrings of hope since receiving the news of her father's death. She had no idea what the future held, but for tonight at least she was safe. As promised, the small bedroom was clean and simple, a narrow bed with a quilt that had seen better days, a chest for clothing, and a small bedside table with a lamp. What surprised Winnie most was the bookshelf tucked into one corner, filled with volumes that ranged from practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry to works by Dickens, Twain, and even Shakespeare. "You like to read?" she asked Sam when he showed her to the room. He looked almost embarrassed. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She taught me to love books, said they were windows to worlds I might never see otherwise." He touched the spine of a well-worn copy of David Copperfield. "When you spend as much time alone as I do, books become good friends." Winnie ran her fingers over the volumes, feeling a connection to this man that she hadn't expected. Her own mother, dead now for 15 years, had also valued education and had taught Winnie to read and cipher before consumption took her. "Get some rest," Sam said, backing toward the door. "Morning comes early out here." He wasn't wrong. Winnie woke to the sound of a rooster crowing not from Sam's non-existent chicken coop, but from a neighboring farm. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and for a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the peeling wallpaper of her room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up, pushing her hair from her face. She could hear movement in the main room, the clank of a pot, the crackle of the fire being stoked. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, and attempted to bring some order to her unruly auburn curls with her fingers. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Sam by the stove, frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. He looked up at her entrance and gave a nod of greeting. "Hope you're hungry," he said, gesturing to the table where plates and utensils were already set out. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and biscuits without burning down the place." Winnie took a seat at the table, acutely aware of the domestic scene they presented like a husband and wife beginning their day together. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks that she hoped Sam would attribute to the warmth of the stove. "I can cook," she offered as he placed a plate in front of her. "My father said I make the best flapjacks west of the Mississippi, though I suspect he was being kind." Sam sat across from her, his own plate piled high with bacon and biscuits. "I won't turn down flapjacks," he said with a smile. "Or any cooking that doesn't come from my own hand. Been living on trail food for too long." As they ate, Sam outlined the routines of the small ranch. He had a vegetable garden that needed harvesting before the first frost, a few repairs to make to the cabin and stable before winter set in, and plans to acquire some chickens and perhaps a milk cow if he could find one at a reasonable price. "I've been prospecting for years," he explained, "but I've come to realize that a man can't live on dreams of gold forever. This land is good, plenty of water from the creek, soil that'll grow just about anything if you treat it right, and enough game in the hills to keep meat on the table year-round." Winnie listened, impressed by his practical approach. So many men in the territory were chasing the next big strike, moving from claim to claim with nothing to show for it but calloused hands and empty pockets. Her father had been one of them, always convinced that the mother lode was just one more shovelful of dirt away. "What about Clayton Black?" she asked. "You said he was looking for you." Sam's expression darkened. "Word is he moved on to Albuquerque last week, but men like Black have long memories and longer reaches. I'll need to be careful for a while yet." After breakfast, Sam showed Winnie around the property. The ranch was modest but well situated, with a creek running along one edge providing water for irrigation, a stand of pine trees offering shelter from the wind, and open pastureland that could support a small herd of cattle or sheep. "It's beautiful," Winnie said honestly as they stood on a small rise overlooking the land. The autumn sun gilded the landscape, and in the distance, the mountains rose purple against the sky. "It needs work," Sam replied, but she could hear the pride in his voice. A lot of work. But it's mine, free and clear. No bank can take it, no claim jumper can steal it. As they walked back toward the cabin, a horse and rider appeared on the road, heading their way. Sam's hand went instinctively to his hip, where Winnie noticed for the first time that he wore a revolver. "Expecting trouble?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Just habit, out here it pays to be cautious." But his posture relaxed as the rider drew closer. "It's just Sarah, my neighbor." The woman who rode into the yard a few minutes later was in her late 40s, with graying hair tucked neatly beneath a bonnet, and a face weathered by sun and wind but still handsome. She sat easily in the saddle, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket, and surveyed Winnie with frank curiosity. "Samuel Reed," she called as she dismounted, "were you planning to introduce me to your guest, or am I supposed to pretend I don't see her standing right there?" Sam chuckled and stepped forward to take the horse's reins. "Sarah Thornton, meet Winifred Lawson. She's Thomas Lawson's daughter." Sarah's expression softened immediately. "Oh, my dear, I heard about your father. Such a terrible thing." She reached out and took Winnie's hand in her own. "He was a fine man, your father. Helped my late husband and me when we first settled here, showed us where to dig our well so we'd hit the best water." Winnie swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. Sarah, please, Mrs. Thornton makes me sound like some starchy old biddy from back east." She turned to Sam. "I came to tell you that Hank Miller's selling off some of his livestock. Got more mouths than he can feed with the drought hitting his grazing land so hard." "Thought you might be interested in that milk cow you've been talking about." Sam nodded. "I was planning to head into town today anyway. Need to pick up some supplies." He glanced at Winnie. "Would you like to come along? Might be good for you to get out, see something besides these four walls." Winnie hesitated. Going to town meant possibly running into Mrs. Peterson, who would no doubt demand payment for the night she had stolen by leaving without notice. But it also meant a chance to visit her father's grave and perhaps collect any of his possessions that the sheriff might be holding. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that." Sarah looked between them, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well then, I'll leave you to it. Winnie, you're welcome at my place anytime. It's the small house with the blue door just down the road. I don't get many visitors, especially not female ones, so you'd be doing me a kindness." After Sarah left, Sam and Winnie prepared for the trip into town. He insisted she take his spare coat the days were warm enough, but autumn evenings in the territory could turn bitter cold without warning. The ride to truth or consequences took about an hour, with Winnie once again seated in front of Sam on his stallion Blaze. This time, she was more aware of his physical presence, the solid wall of his chest against her back, the way his arms encircled her as he held the reins, the rhythm of his breathing that she could feel against her shoulder. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, somehow, and shabbier. The main street was dusty and rutted, lined with false-fronted buildings that housed the usual frontier businesses. A general store, a saloon, a barber shop that doubled as a dentist's office, a small hotel that catered to the occasional drummer passing through, and Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, which Winnie was careful to avoid looking at as they rode past. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, a small adobe building with bars on its windows and a weathered sign hanging above the door. Sheriff Jenkins was a tall, thin man with a drooping mustache and tired eyes that had seen too much of human nature's darker side. "Miss Lawson," he said, rising from behind his desk when they entered, "I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "Thank you, Sheriff," Winnie replied. "I was hoping you might have some of my father's personal effects." Jenkins nodded and moved to a cabinet behind his desk. "Not much, I'm afraid. The claim jumpers took most everything of value." He removed a small cloth bundle and placed it on the desk. "Found these in his cabin after we brought him back to town." Winnie unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers. Inside was her father's pipe, a book of poetry by Tennyson that had been her mother's. A small leather pouch containing a few gold flakes not enough to be worth stealing, apparently an daguerreotype of her mother, the silver frame tarnished but intact. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the items to her chest. "These mean more to me than any gold dust." Jenkins cleared his throat awkwardly. "There's one more thing." He pulled open a desk drawer and removed an envelope. "Your father left this with me about a month ago. Said if anything happened to him, I was to give it to you." Winnie took the envelope, noting her name written in her father's familiar, spidery handwriting. She slipped it into her pocket, not wanting to read whatever final message he had left her in front of strangers, even well-meaning ones. "Miss Lawson is staying at my place for now," Sam told the sheriff, his voice matter of fact. "Thought you should know in case anyone comes looking for her." Jenkins' eyebrows rose slightly, but he merely nodded. "I'll make note of it and read watch yourself. Clayton Black may have moved on, but he's got friends in these parts." Sam's jaw tightened. "I'm always watching, Sheriff. You know that." Their next stop was the cemetery, a small plot of land on a hill overlooking the town. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses or, for those who could afford it, modest headstones. Thomas Lawson's grave was fresh, the earth still dark and loose, marked with a cross that bore his name, dates of birth and death, and the words "beloved father." Winnie knelt beside the grave, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I didn't get to say goodbye," she said softly. "You always went off on your own, chasing that next big strike, but you always came back, until now." Sam stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand, giving her the privacy to grieve. The wind whispered through the grasses, and overhead, a hawk circled lazily in the clear blue sky. After a time, Winnie rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. "He would have liked it here," she said to Sam as they walked back to where Blaze was tethered, up high with a view of the mountains. At the general store, Sam purchased the supplies they needed: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for his rifle, and a few yards of sturdy cotton fabric that he handed to Winnie with a shrug. "Thought you might need something," he said gruffly, "for clothes or whatnot." The simple kindness nearly undid her. She had been holding herself together by sheer force of will, and now this man, this virtual stranger who had opened his home and his life to her, was thinking of her needs before she even voiced them. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick. Their final stop was at Hank Miller's farm on the outskirts of town. Miller was a stocky man with a booming voice and hands like hams, who greeted Sam with a hearty handshake and a slap on the back. "Reed, heard you were in the market for a cow." His eyes shifted to Winnie, and his grin widened. "And who's this pretty young lady? Don't tell me you've finally decided to settle down." Winnie felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Sam answered calmly, "This is Miss Winifred Lawson, Thomas Lawson's daughter. She's staying with me for a time while she sorts out her affairs." Miller's expression sobered immediately. "Miss Lawson, my condolences. Your father was a fine man." He turned back to Sam. "Well, come on then. Cows are in the back pasture. Got a nice little Jersey that might suit you, good milker, gentle disposition." The cow in question was indeed gentle, a pretty fawn-colored animal with soulful brown eyes who allowed Winnie to stroke her nose without flinching. "What do you think?" Sam asked her as Miller stood a few paces away, giving them space to discuss. Winnie was surprised he was asking her opinion. "She seems healthy," she offered. "And she's not too old, probably has many good years of milk production ahead of her." Sam nodded, clearly pleased with her assessment. After some haggling with Miller, they agreed on a price, with the cow to be delivered to Sam's ranch the following day. As they rode back, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Winnie found herself thinking about the letter in her pocket. What final words had her father left for her? Advice? Regrets? The location of a hidden claim that might yet prove valuable? Back at the ranch, after tending to Blaze and eating a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Sam excused himself to check on the fencing in the north pasture, giving Winnie some privacy. She sat by the fire, her father's letter in her hands, gathering the courage to open it. Finally, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "My dearest Winnie," it began in her father's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I have gone to join your mother in whatever lies beyond this life. I hope it was quick, and that I did not linger as a burden to you. I have not been the father you deserved. Too often, I chased dreams of gold instead of giving you the stable home and life you should have had. But know this: every step I took, every claim I worked, was with the hope of securing your future. I leave you little in the way of worldly goods, but there is one thing I can give you. By the time you read this, Samuel Reed will have found you. I asked him to look after you if anything happened to me, and he gave me his word. Sam is the best man I know, honest, hardworking, and true to his word. He is also alone, as you now are. I am not suggesting an arrangement between you that would be presumptuous even for me. But I hope you will consider staying near him, perhaps working together to build something lasting. You both deserve happiness, and sometimes it can be found in the most unexpected places. Remember that I have always loved you, even when I was too restless to stay in one place. You were the joy of my life, my greatest treasure. Your loving father, Thomas Lawson." Tears blurred Winnie's vision as she folded the letter and held it to her heart. Her father had planned for her care, had found a way to protect her even after he was gone. And he had sent her to a man he trusted, a man he clearly respected and believed would treat her honorably. When Sam returned, she was still sitting by the fire, her father's letter tucked safely into her pocket. He hung his hat by the door and looked at her questioningly. "Everything all right?" he asked, moving to the stove to pour himself a cup of coffee. Winnie nodded. "My father's letter," she said simply. He asked you to look after me, didn't he, before he died?" Sam's shoulders tensed, but he turned to face her squarely. "He did, but that's not why I came for you. I would have done that regardless once I heard what happened." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the coffee cup in his hands. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he said finally. "To have no one to turn to when the world goes sideways. And because your father was a good man who deserved better than he got. So do you." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside Winnie. Here was a man who had no ulterior motives, no expectations beyond offering help to someone in need. In a world where most people wanted something in return for their kindness, Sam Reed was a rare exception. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He gave a slight nod, as if uncomfortable with her gratitude, and changed the subject. "Miller will bring the cow tomorrow. Thought we might clear out the old chicken coop too. Needs a good cleaning before we get any birds." And just like that, they were making plans together, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Winnie found herself smiling as she listened to Sam outline the tasks for the coming days. For the first time since learning of her father's death, she felt a sense of purpose, a direction for her life that went beyond mere survival. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Winnie took over the cooking, proving that her father hadn't exaggerated about her skill with flapjacks. She also took charge of the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the summer crops and preserving what she could for winter. The milk cow, whom she named Buttercup, provided more than enough milk for their needs, and Winnie began making butter and cheese, skills she had learned from her mother years ago. Sam worked from dawn to dusk on the ranch, mending fences, reinforcing the cabin for the coming winter, hunting to stock up on meat, and acquiring a small flock of chickens from a farmer who was moving east. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking about their day, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Winnie learned that Sam had been born in Missouri, the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher. He had come west at 18, looking for adventure and fortune, and had spent the next decade prospecting, working cattle drives, and occasionally serving as a guide for survey parties mapping the territory. He had bought this land 3 years ago, paying for it with a small strike of gold he'd made in the mountains to the north. and had been slowly building it into a working ranch ever since. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Kansas, where her father had farmed until her mother's death. After that, Thomas Lawson had been unable to stay in one place, moving from mining camp to mining camp, taking his daughter with him until she was old enough to be left behind in boarding houses and the homes of sympathetic families, while he followed his dreams of striking it rich. "It wasn't a bad life," she said one evening as they sat side by side on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "I saw more of the country than most people ever do, met all sorts of interesting characters. But I always wondered what it would be like to have a real home, to put down roots somewhere." Sam was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "And now, what do you want now?" It was a simple question, but one that Winnie found surprisingly difficult to answer. A month ago, she would have said she wanted security, a roof over her head, enough food to eat. Now, with those basic needs met, she found herself wanting more, not material things, but a sense of belonging, of purpose, of connection. "I want this," she said finally, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. "A place of my own, work that matters, people who care whether I live or die." She glanced at him, then quickly away. "What about you? What do you want?" Sam leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his profile strong against the fading light. "Pretty much the same," he said. "This land. A chance to build something lasting, someone to share it with." The words hung in the air between them, full of unspoken possibility. Winnie felt her heart quicken, but before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. Sam was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside," he said, his voice low and urgent. Winnie stood but didn't move toward the door. "Who is it?" "Can't tell yet, but I'm not expecting visitors, and neither is Sarah, not at this hour." His face was tense, his eyes scanning the road that led to the ranch. The rider emerged from the gathering dusk, a man on a dark horse, moving at a steady trot. As he drew closer, Winnie could see that he wore a badge that caught the last rays of the setting sun. "It's Sheriff Jenkins," she said, relief washing over her. Sam's posture relaxed slightly, but there was still a wariness in his stance as the sheriff rode into the yard and dismounted. "Evening, Reed, Miss Lawson." Jenkins removed his hat, revealing hair damp with sweat despite the cool evening. "Sorry to disturb you, but I thought you should know Clayton Black's back in town." Sam's expression hardened. "Thought he moved on to Albuquerque." Jenkins nodded. "He did. But he's back now, asking questions about you. Someone told him you're living out here." His eyes flickered to Winnie. "And that you've got company." A cold dread settled in Winnie's stomach. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking between the two men. Sam's jaw was tight. "It means Black's still looking to settle the score, and now he thinks he's found a way to get to me." He turned to the sheriff. "You tell him where I am." Jenkins looked offended. "Course not. But this is a small town, people talk. Especially when a confirmed bachelor suddenly takes in a young woman." He shrugged apologetically at Winnie. "No offense meant, Miss Lawson." "None taken," she replied automatically, her mind racing. This man, Clayton Black, was a threat to Sam because of something he'd done to protect a young boy. And now, because of her presence here, the threat had found its target. "What do you suggest?" Sam asked Jenkins, his voice level despite the tension evident in his posture. The sheriff sighed, settling his hat back on his head. "Black's dangerous, but he's also careful. He won't risk a murder charge if he can help it. More likely he'll try to provoke you into drawing first." He glanced at the darkening sky. "I'd stay out here for now, keep your head down. I'll send word if he leaves town again." After Jenkins left, Sam paced the cabin like a caged wolf, his face set in grim lines. Winnie watched him, her own fear mingling with a growing determination. This was her home now, too, at least for the time being, and she wouldn't let some vengeful gambler destroy the peace they had found here. "Sam," she said finally, stopping his restless movement, "tell me about Clayton Black. I need to understand what we're facing." He looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring her strength, then nodded and sat down at the table. Winnie took the seat across from him, waiting. "Black's a professional gambler," Sam began, his voice low and controlled. "Travels the territory, setting up games in saloons, fleecing locals and travelers alike. He's good at what he does, good enough that he doesn't always need to cheat, but he does anyway." He rubbed a hand over his face. "About 2 months ago, he was in Truth or Consequences, running a poker game at the Silver Dollar. A young man joined, couldn't have been more than 17, looked like he was fresh off his father's farm. Black started cheating, taking the boy for everything he had. I saw what was happening. Called Black out on it. He denied it, of course, but the damage was done. The other players were suspicious. The game broke up. Black lost a night's earnings because of me." Sam's eyes met hers, hard as flint. "He's not the kind of man who forgets something like that," Winnie considered this. "So he's here for revenge, but the sheriff's right, he won't risk murder charges." "No," Sam agreed, "but he might try to provoke me into drawing first, or he might look for other ways to hurt me." His gaze was steady on her face. "Like through you," the implication was clear. By staying here, Winnie was not only potentially in danger herself, but she was also a vulnerability that Black could exploit against Sam. "I should leave," she said softly, though the thought of going back to a life of uncertainty and struggle made her heart ache. "Go to Santa Fe, like you suggested when we first met." Sam's hand shot out, covering hers on the table. "No, running is exactly what he wants. It would show him I can be intimidated." His fingers tightened around hers. "Besides, this is your home now. I won't have you driven from it by the likes of Clayton Black. You're home now." The words warmed her despite the circumstances. In just a few weeks, this small ranch had indeed become home to her in a way no place had been since her mother died. And Sam. Sam had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. "Then we stay," she said, turning her hand to clasp his. "And we face whatever comes together." The look Sam gave her then was full of admiration and something more, something that made her breath catch in her throat. But he only nodded and released her hand, rising from the table. "I'll take first watch tonight," he said, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. "You should get some rest." But rest was elusive for both of them in the days that followed. Sam insisted that Winnie not go anywhere alone, and he was constantly vigilant, his hand never far from his weapon. They continued their work on the ranch, harvesting the last of the garden, preparing for winter, caring for the animals, but there was a tension now that hadn't been there before, a waiting for something or someone to break the peace they had found. A week after the sheriff's visit, Sam had to go into town for supplies they couldn't do without. Despite Winnie's protests, he insisted she stay at the ranch. "Black's looking for me, not you," he said as he saddled Blaze. "And I won't risk taking you somewhere he might be watching. Sarah will keep an eye on you. She's a better shot than most men I know." He checked the revolver at his hip and the rifle in its scabbard. "I'll be back before dark." Winnie watched him ride away, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a heavy blanket. She tried to distract herself with work feeding the chickens, churning butter, mending a shirt of Sam's that had torn on a fence post, but her thoughts kept returning to the man who had become so important to her in such a short time. It was late afternoon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, and she hurried out to the porch, expecting to see Sam returning with their supplies. Instead, a stranger rode into the yard, a tall man on a sleek black horse, dressed in a fine suit that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. He wore a gun belt with a pearl-handled revolver, and there was something in his cold eyes that made Winnie's skin crawl. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth as silk but with a hard edge beneath. "You must be Miss Lawson. I've heard quite a bit about you." He removed his hat with a flourish, revealing dark hair slicked back from a high forehead. "Clayton Black, at your service." Winnie's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Black, I'm afraid Mr. Reed isn't here at the moment." Black smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. "Oh, I know. I saw him in town, haggling with old Peterson over the price of flour. Thought it might be a good opportunity for you and I to have a little chat." He dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post with deliberate slowness. "You're quite the talk of the town, you know. The prospector's daughter and the reformed claim jumper playing house together out here in the wilderness." "Mr. Reed was never a claim jumper," Winnie said, anger overcoming her fear. "And what we do here is none of your concern." Black laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Spirited, I see why Reed's taken a shine to you." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "But you're right, of course. What you two do out here is your business. My business is with Reed himself." His smile faded. "He cost me a considerable sum of money, not to mention my reputation. In my line of work, a reputation for honesty even when it's not deserved is essential." "So you've come to what? Threaten him?" Winnie forced herself to stand her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run inside and bar the door. "Threaten?" Black looked shocked, but it was a mockery of the emotion. "My dear Miss Lawson, I'm a businessman. I don't make threats, I make propositions." He glanced around the ranch, his gaze calculating. "Reed's built himself a nice little spread here. Be a shame if something were to happen to it, or to you." The threat was clear despite his smooth words. Winnie fought to keep her voice from trembling. "Mr. Reed will be back soon. I suggest you leave before he returns unless you're prepared to face him directly." Black's eyes hardened, but his smile remained fixed in place. "Don't worry, I intend to face him, but I thought it only fair to give you a chance to. Reconsider your situation. A woman like you could do better than a failed prospector turned rancher. I've connections in Santa Fe, Denver, even San Francisco." He took another step closer. "You could have a life of comfort, of culture. All you have to do is walk away from this primitive existence." Winnie stood her ground, disgust rising in her throat. "Mr. Black, I believe I've made my choice clear. Now I must ask you to leave my property." Black's smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury that made him seem suddenly more dangerous. "Your property?" "My dear, you are a guest here at best, a charity case at worst. Reed took you in because your father died with nothing to leave you but the clothes on your back." He gestured dismissively at the cabin, the garden, the small corral where Buttercup grazed peacefully. "This isn't yours. And it might not be Reed's for much longer either." The sound of a shotgun being cocked cut through the air. Winnie turned to see Sarah Thornton standing at the edge of the yard, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Black's chest. "I believe the lady asked you to leave," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I suggest you do so, Mr. Black, before I decide the world would be better off without your kind in it." Black's hand twitched toward his gun, but he thought better of it. Even if he was fast, and Winnie suspected he couldn't outdraw a shotgun at this range. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, nodding as if they were meeting at a social gathering rather than at gunpoint. "Always a pleasure. I was just leaving." He turned back to Winnie, the anger in his eyes belying his casual tone. "We'll continue this conversation another time, Miss Lawson. Give Reed my regards." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, tipped his hat to the women with mock courtesy, and rode away at an unhurried pace, as if he had all the time in the world. When he was out of sight, Winnie's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank onto the porch steps, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. Sarah lowered the shotgun and hurried to her side. "Are you all right, child? Did he hurt you?" Winnie shook her head. "No, he just talked, made threats, but in a way that could be taken as simple conversation." She looked up at the older woman. "Thank you for coming when you did." Sarah patted her shoulder. "I saw him ride in and recognized him from descriptions. Nasty piece of work, that one." She glanced in the direction Black had gone. "We should get inside in case he decides to circle back, and I'll stay until Sam returns." Inside the cabin, Winnie paced nervously while Sarah kept watch at the window, the shotgun never far from her hands. It was nearly dusk when they heard the sound of a horse approaching, and Winnie's heart leapt into her throat. "It's Sam," Sarah announced after peering out the window, and Winnie nearly collapsed with relief. She flung open the door as Sam dismounted, supplies piled behind him on Blaze's back. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he demanded, striding toward her, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. Clayton Black was here, Sarah answered before Winnie could speak. Came calling while you were in town, made some thinly veiled threats. Sam's face darkened with anger. Did he hurt you? He asked Winnie, his voice tight with controlled fury. She shook her head. No, Sarah arrived with her shotgun before things could escalate. What did he say? Sam asked, leading Blaze toward the stable, his movements quick and efficient despite his obvious anger. Winnie and Sarah followed, Winnie recounting her conversation with Black as Sam unsaddled his horse and began unloading the supplies. When she finished, Sam was silent for a long moment, his back to her as he hung up Blaze's saddle. When he turned, his expression was resolute. This ends now, he said. I'm not going to live looking over my shoulder waiting for Black to make his move. And I'm not going to let him threaten you or this place. He looked at Sarah. Would you mind staying with Winnie tonight? I need to go into town. Sam, no. Winnie stepped forward, grabbing his arm. That's exactly what he wants to draw you out, provoke you into a confrontation where he can claim self-defense. She's right, Sam, Sarah added. Black's dangerous, but he's patient. He'll wait for the advantage. Sam looked down at Winnie's hand on his arm, then up at her face, his eyes softening slightly. I can't just sit here and wait for him to come back, maybe when you're alone. I won't risk that. Then we'll go to the sheriff, Winnie insisted. Tell him what happened today. Black threatened me on our property. That's against the law. It's our word against his, Sam said. And Black's careful. I doubt he said anything that couldn't be interpreted as a friendly warning from one concerned citizen to another. Winnie thought back to the conversation, to Black's carefully chosen words. Sam was right, there was nothing explicitly threatening in what Black had said, at least nothing that would stand up in court. Then we both go to town tomorrow, she said finally. Together. We'll talk to the sheriff, let people see us, show Black that his intimidation tactics aren't working. And then we come back here and carry on with our lives. Sam studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you stay with me every minute. No wandering off, no matter what. Sarah cleared her throat. Well, if that's settled, I should be getting home. Got animals to feed and a stew that'll burn if I leave it much longer. She handed the shotgun to Winnie. Keep this handy just in case. Though I doubt Black will try anything tonight, he likes to let fear do his work for him. After Sarah left, Winnie and Sam brought the supplies into the cabin and put them away in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The easy companionship they had developed over the past weeks was still there, but now it was overlaid with a tension that had nothing to do with Black's threats and everything to do with the growing awareness between them. Sam, Winnie said finally as they sat down to the simple supper she had prepared, there's something I need to ask you. He looked up from his plate, waiting. Why did you really take me in that night? The truth, please. Sam set down his fork, considering her question. Because it was the right thing to do, he said after a moment. Because your father asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you alone in that place with no one to turn to. He paused, his eyes meeting hers across the table. And because from the moment I saw you through that window, something in me knew that you belonged here, with me. The simple honesty of his words took Winnie's breath away. I feel the same, she said softly. As if I've been wandering my whole life, and somehow, against all odds, I've found my way home. Sam reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Winnie, I'm not good with words, never have been, but I want you to know what we've built here. It's not just a temporary arrangement for me. If you want to stay, truly stay as my wife, I'd be the happiest man in the territory. Tears sprang to Winnie's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Are you asking me to marry you, Samuel Reed? A slow smile spread across his face. I reckon I am, Winifred Lawson. Though it's not the most romantic proposal, with Black's threats hanging over us and danger around every corner. Winnie squeezed his hand, her own smile breaking through her tears. I think it's perfect, and yes, I will marry you. Not because I need a protector or a provider, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you, whatever challenges come our way." Sam stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, his eyes were alight with a joy she had never seen in them before. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice husky, "after we deal with Black, we'll talk to the minister in town. No reason to wait, is there?" Winnie laughed, a sound of pure happiness despite the danger that still lurked outside their door. "None at all, though Sarah will be disappointed if she doesn't get to help with the preparations." "Sarah can help plan a proper celebration after," Sam replied, pulling her close again. "But the actual marriage that can't happen soon enough for me." They rode into Truth or Consequences the next morning, Winnie seated behind Sam on Blaze, her arms wrapped around his waist. The October air was crisp, the sky a clear, endless blue, and despite the potential danger awaiting them in town, Winnie felt a sense of purpose and determination that banished fear. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where they reported Black's visit to the ranch. Jenkins listened grimly but, as Sam had predicted, could offer little in the way of concrete help. "Unless he actually breaks the law, my hands are tied," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "But I'll keep an eye on him while he's in town, and I've sent word to the territorial marshal about his activities. With any luck, they'll catch him cheating somewhere else and put him away for a while." Their next stop was the general store, where Winnie needed to purchase fabric for a wedding dress. As Sam had pointed out, there was no reason to delay their marriage, especially given the circumstances. The store was busy, with several women examining bolts of cloth and men gathered around the pot-bellied stove at the back, exchanging news and gossip. Conversation faltered as Winnie and Sam entered, then resumed with increased vigor, whispers following them as they made their way to the fabric section. Winnie held her head high, ignoring the curious stares and not-so-subtle glances. Let them talk. Their opinion meant nothing compared to the happiness she had found with Sam. Mrs. Peterson was among the women shopping for fabric, and she did not bother to lower her voice as she remarked to her companion, "Well, I always suspected she was no better than she should be, living out there with him without the benefit of marriage. Her poor father must be turning in his grave." Winnie felt Sam tense beside her, ready to defend her honor, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "It's not worth it," she murmured. "We know the truth." But Mrs. Peterson was not done. She approached them directly, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "Miss Lawson, Mr. Reed. I trust you're here to make arrangements with the minister. It's high time, considering the situation." "As a matter of fact, we are," Sam replied, his voice level despite the anger Winnie could feel radiating from him. "We're to be married tomorrow. You're welcome to attend, Mrs. Peterson, though given your treatment of my fiancée while she was under your roof, I wouldn't expect a warm reception." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to retort, but another voice cut through the tense silence of the store. "Well, isn't this touching?" The claim jumper and the prospector's daughter, ready to make it official. Clayton Black stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as before, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pearl-handled revolver. "My congratulations, though I fear I must object to the union. Miss Lawson deserves better than a man who cheats at cards and hides behind women's skirts." The store emptied rapidly, customers slipping out the back door or pressing themselves against the walls, eager to be out of the line of fire. Sam positioned himself slightly in front of Winnie, his posture relaxed but ready. "You're the only cheat here, Black," he said calmly. "And I'm not hiding behind anyone. You've got a problem with me, let's settle it, but leave Miss Lawson out of it." Black's smile was cold. "But she's already involved, isn't she? Quite deeply, from what I hear." He stepped further into the store, the floorboards creaking beneath his polished boots. "I wonder, does she know the truth about you, Reed, about your past, about the men who died in that mine collapse in Colorado?" The one you supposedly predicted but couldn't prevent, when he felt Sam stiffen beside her. That was an accident, he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. I tried to warn them, no one would listen. So you say, Black replied smoothly, but there were those who thought differently. Those who wondered if perhaps you had engineered the collapse to eliminate the competition for a particularly rich vein. That's a lie, Winnie stepped forward, unable to contain her anger. Sam would never do such a thing. He's the most honorable man I've ever known. Black's eyes shifted to her, cold and calculating. My dear Miss Lawson, love is blind indeed, but perhaps not as blind as you've been. Did you know that your father and Reed had a falling out just before his death, that they argued bitterly over a claim your father had discovered? Another lie, Sam growled, his hand now resting openly on his revolver. Thomas and I never argued about anything more serious than whether trout taste better fried or smoked. Is that so? Black raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you can explain why Reed was seen near your father's claim the night he was killed. Why he came into town with gold dust to spend, despite not having worked a claim of his own in months. Winnie's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Sam, whose face had gone pale beneath his tan. Sam, it's not what he's making it sound like, Sam said, his eyes never leaving Black. Yes, I was at Thomas's claim that night. He'd asked me to check on it while he was in town getting supplies. And yes, I found some dust in a pan he'd left by the creek. I brought it back with me, intending to give it to him, but when I heard what had happened. He swallowed hard. I used some of it to buy supplies for the ranch. I was going to tell you, Winnie, I just couldn't find the right time. Black's laugh was triumphant. And there you have it, Miss Lawson. The man you trust, the man you're planning to marry, has been keeping secrets from you. Who knows what else he's hiding? Winnie looked between the two men, one whom she had come to love with every fiber of her being, one who seemed intent on destroying that love for his own twisted purposes. She thought of the weeks she had spent with Sam, the way he treated her with respect and kindness, the home they were building together. And she thought of her father's letter, his absolute trust in Sam Reed. I know everything I need to know, she said finally, moving to stand beside Sam, taking his hand in hers. I know that my father trusted this man with my life and future. I know that he has been nothing but honorable and kind since the moment we met. And I know that you, Mr. Black, are a liar and a coward who hides behind words because you dare not face a real man in a fair fight. Black's face contorted with fury, his pretense of civility dropping away like a discarded mask. You little fool, he snarled. Reed is nothing but a claim-jumping murderer who's using you to establish himself as a respectable rancher. Once he's got what he wants, he'll leave you just like every other woman he's ever known. Sam's voice was deadly quiet. That's enough, Black. You've said your piece. Now leave before this gets ugly. Black's hand moved to his gun, his eyes glittering with malice. It's already ugly, Reed, and it's about to get worse. Everything happened so quickly that Winnie could hardly follow the sequence of events. Black's hand dropped to his gun, but before he could clear the holster, a shot rang out, not from Sam's revolver, which remained in its holster, but from somewhere behind them. Black staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as a crimson stain spread across the front of his fine coat. Winnie turned to see Sheriff Jenkins standing in the back doorway of the store, a smoking rifle in his hands. I warned you, Black, Jenkins said, advancing into the room. Told you not to cause trouble in my town. Black sank to his knees, his hand still on his gun but seemingly unable to draw it. You shot me in the back, he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. No, sir. I shot you from the side while you were attempting to draw on an unarmed man. Big difference in the eyes of the law. Jenkins looked at the storekeeper, who had emerged from behind the counter. Mr. Peterson, fetch the doctor, though I doubt he'll be of much use at this point. Black collapsed fully then, sprawling on the rough wooden floor, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. A rattle escaped his throat, and then he was still. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the sound of Winnie's ragged breathing. She felt Sam's arm around her shoulders, steadying her, and she leaned into his strength. "I reckon that settles the matter of Clayton Black," Jenkins said, laying his rifle on the counter. "Mr. Reed, Miss Lawson, I believe you were planning to see the minister. I'd be happy to accompany you after I've taken care of this mess." The rest of the day passed in a blur for Winnie. The doctor came and officially pronounced Black dead. Statements were taken, arrangements made for the body, and eventually she and Sam found themselves at the small white church on the edge of town, speaking with Reverend Johnson about a wedding ceremony the following day. "Nothing fancy," Sam explained to the minister, his hand still firmly clasped around Winnie's. "Just the vows and your blessing. We can have a proper celebration later when this business with Black is further behind us." Reverend Johnson, a kind-faced man with a shock of white hair, looked between them with understanding eyes. "Of course. Though I must say, it's not often I perform a wedding ceremony less than 24 hours after a shooting in town. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer to wait a week or two?" Winnie shook her head. "We've waited long enough, Reverend. Life is unpredictable, as today has shown us. We don't want to delay our happiness any longer than necessary." The minister nodded, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Well said, my dear. Tomorrow at noon, then. I'll have my wife arrange for some flowers from her garden." They left the church as the setting sun cast long shadows across the town, casting a golden glow over the simple wooden buildings. Despite the events of the day, or perhaps because of them, Winnie felt a profound sense of peace. She and Sam had faced their first real test as a couple and had emerged stronger for it. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the gold dust," Sam said as they rode slowly back toward the ranch, the evening air cool against their faces. "I was going to use it to buy you a proper wedding ring." "Wanted it to be a surprise." Winnie tightened her arms around his waist. "It doesn't matter now, none of it does. All that matters is that we're together, and tomorrow we'll begin our life as husband and wife." Sam reached down to cover her hands with one of his. "You know what Black said about me about the mine collapse in Colorado? It wasn't true. I did try to warn them. The support timbers were rotting, but the mine owner didn't want to spend the money to replace them. When I spoke up, he fired me. A week later, the mine collapsed. 3 men died." "I believe you," Winnie said simply, "just as my father did, just as anyone who truly knows you would." He was quiet for a long moment, guiding Blaze along the familiar trail home. "I never thought I'd find this," he said finally. "A home, someone to share it with, a future worth fighting for." Winnie rested her cheek against his back, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Nor did I. But here we are, against all odds." The ranch came into view as they crested the last hill, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Buttercup lowed a greeting from her pasture, and the chickens clucked as they settled into their roosts for the night. It was a simple scene, ordinary even, but to Winnie, it was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. It was home. That night, they sat on the porch long after darkness had fallen, speaking softly of their plans for the future, the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, the possibility of children someday, the life they would build together. The threat of Clayton Black was gone, leaving them free to focus on what mattered most, their love for each other and the home they were creating. "I never thanked you properly," Winnie said, her head resting on Sam's shoulder as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "For what?" he asked, his arm warm around her waist. She smiled in the darkness. "For tapping on my window that night, for saying come inside when I had nowhere else to go." Sam turned to her, his face barely visible in the starlight but his voice full of emotion. "Best thing I ever did," he said softly. "Brought me more happiness than I ever thought possible." The next day, beneath the simple wooden cross of Truth or Consequence's small church, Winifred Lawson became Winifred Reed. Sarah Thornton stood as her witness, beaming with pride as if Winnie were her own daughter. Sheriff Jenkins stood for Sam, his usually stern face softened by the occasion. Winnie wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton, hastily sewn but lovely nonetheless, with wildflowers in her hair. Sam had splurged on a new shirt and had even trimmed his beard for the occasion. They were not a fancy couple, but as Reverend Johnson pronounced them man and wife, the love between them was as palpable as the autumn sunlight streaming through the church windows. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said, and Sam did so. A gentle but thorough kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. That evening, back at the ranch that was now truly their home, they stood together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Mrs. Reed," Sam said, testing the name on his tongue as if savoring a fine wine. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Winnie laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I think it's perfect, almost as perfect as Mr. Reed." He pulled her into his arms, his expression suddenly serious. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, Winnie, to be the man you deserve." She touched his face gently, tracing the lines that years of sun and hardship had etched there. "You already are that man, you always have been." Inside the cabin, a lamp glowed warmly, casting its light into the gathering dusk. Behind them, Buttercup lowed softly in her pasture, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. It was not a grand scene, not the stuff of novels or fairy tales, but it was theirs, a simple, honest life built on love, respect, and the courage to face whatever came their way. "Shall we go inside?" Sam asked, his voice low and intimate. Winnie smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's go home." And so they did, stepping into the warmth of their cabin, closing the door behind them on the vast, wild territory outside. Whatever the future held, be it prosperity or hardship, joy or sorrow, they would face it together. Two souls who had found in each other the greatest treasure of all. A love as enduring as the land itself. In the years that followed, the Reed Ranch thrived under their combined care and determination. Winnie's garden expanded to provide not only for their table, but also produce to sell in town. Sam's careful management of their resources allowed them to add cattle to their holdings, and within 5 years, they had one of the most prosperous small ranches in the territory. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Winnie's father, arrived less than a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, who from her earliest days showed signs of inheriting her grandmother's love of books and learning. The territory changed around them, becoming more settled, more civilized. Truth or Consequences grew from a rough mining town into a respectable community with a school, a proper church, and even a small hotel for travelers passing through. Sam served for a time on the town council, helping to shape the future of the place they called home. And through it all, the hard winters and the bountiful summers, the challenges and the triumphs, they remained steadfast in their love for each other. Each night, they would sit on their porch and watch the stars come out, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, grateful for the life they had built from such unlikely beginnings. Sometimes, on clear autumn evenings when the wind had a bite to it, Winnie would think back to that night when she sat alone in a cold, bare room, grief-stricken and afraid. She would remember the sound of tapping on her window, the sight of a stranger's face peering in at her, and the words that had changed her life. "Come inside." And she would look at the man beside her, older now, with silver threading through his brown hair, lines of laughter around his eyes, his hands calloused from years of honest work, and know that she had made the right choice. That sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not dramatic confrontations or grand gestures, but simple decisions made in moments of desperation and trust. She had come inside, into the warmth and safety of Sam Reed's life, and in doing so had found not just shelter from the cold, but a love that would warm her soul for the rest of her days.